Grisha is a dragon in a world that's forgotten how to see him. Maggie is an unusual child but thinks she is ordinary. They're an unlikely duo, but magic often makes unlikely friendships. If you pay attention, you will understand why magic has chosen you. And now magic has chosen Grisha and Maggie to solve the darkest mystery in Vienna. Decades ago, it was decided that there were too many dragons. As Grisha and Maggie navigate the inner bureaucracies of the Department of Extinct Exotics, negotiate with talking cats, and evade a dangerous magician, the two friends ask the question everyone's forgotten: where have the missing dragons gone? And is there a way to save them? Here is a preview of The Language of Spells by Garret, Weyr. Back when the world was long ago and far away, deep in the black forest, a new dragon was born. The new dragon was known as Grisha, although his parents, in the strange and mysterious ways of grown-ups everywhere, had named him Benevolentia Gaudium. The grandness of Benevolentia Gaudium, meaning kindness and joy, was far too grand for daily use, but his parents liked the way it sounded. They had waited 50 years for his arrival and were naturally thrilled with their son. Normally, it took 30 or so years for a new dragon to arrive in the world, but the special ones took an extra 20 years. No one knew why the world of magic selected particular dragons to be special, but the signs were always clear. One of those signs was the 50 years of waiting. The more obvious signs almost always had to do with an unusual appearance. So after waiting 50 long years, Grisha's parents were baffled by his ordinary looks. The baby dragon had gold eyes. Violet was the most common eye color for dragons, but there was nothing special about gold. And his scales were shades of green, brown, and orange. There was no fuchsia, no blue, nor any red on him anywhere. There was not even the splash of black along the neck that the very best warriors always had. His mother, a national roaring champion, and his father, a well-known sword warrior and fire breather, couldn't understand why they had waited so long for such an ordinary-looking dragon. But they knew that sometimes magic made an occasional wrong turn. Either their baby dragon was a perfectly normal one, or his particular talent would have nothing to do with his appearance. Grisha's mother shrugged, and his father went back to work on the battlefields of men. In a way, it was a relief, for now they would not have to hire one of the older, more experienced dragons to teach Grisha how to manage any extraordinary powers. Grisha was born in the year 1803, which turned out to be the very last year that any dragon, special or otherwise, was born. There is much debate about why dragons stopped being born, and no one knows the exact reason. Perhaps it is simply that in the years following Grisha's birth, the steam engine was invented. Railways were constructed, and light bulbs became a fixture in homes and on streets. As the world of men built new and extraordinary things, the world of magic began to decline. No creature lives beyond its own world, and a dragon is nothing if not a creature from the world of magic. But back in 1803, the year of our dragon's birth, magic was still as common as electricity is today. Dragons, flying horses, and poisonous rabbits roamed Europe's famous forests in large numbers, and were not considered by men or the other woodland creatures as anything strange or even wondrous. Instead, the dragons, flying horses, and poisonous rabbits were accepted as natural parts of the forest, much like the trees. And if the creatures of magic were obliged to perform various jobs and tasks in the world of men, it just meant that sometimes they were obliged to leave the forest. Flying horses were used when someone was too ill to send for a doctor, or when a message could not be trusted to a servant. Poisonous rabbits, who, save for a small black dot on the back of each ear, looked exactly like ordinary ones, served as both spies and assassins. Dragons were created solely for battle. Even more than swords, guns, or cannons, dragons helped to sway a military conflict. Almost always, the side with the most talented dragons won the fight. Fighting was serious business. A good dragon could make or break a royal knight's reputation. Not only that, a single dragon could change the fate of entire kingdoms. In order to prepare for such a future, you might expect that young dragons would be sent to training camps, or be forced into childhood battle drills and endurance tests, or simply take part in endless fighting contests against each other. But that was not how dragons developed their particular talents. Their parents guided them in certain areas, but before that, new dragons were encouraged to discover their world. As children, all of magic's creatures learned about themselves by being curious about the forest. It was only when Grisha first crept under a low bush that he learned he could change his size. I'm small, he thought, with a mix of alarm and pleasure. What had once been a branch he could trample on was now hovering over his head. When he crawled out, he returned to his normal size. To experiment, he sought out a large clearing, and, sure enough, he grew in size, able to see over the surrounding trees. Although a bit painful if done too often or too quickly, all dragons are able to scale to size. In this way, they can easily pursue a fleeing army into a palace or fort. Grisha learned to fly the first time he'd wandered too far from home and had promised to return before sunset. Without even thinking, his wings spread and he soared into the sky. Over time, he learned how to use scents and an internal guide to stay en route. One trick he learned quickly was, on a return trip, to take off from the place he'd landed. That made it far easier to retrace his route. Those were the lessons young dragons were expected to figure out on their own. When they were a bit older, their parents taught them how to breathe fire and to develop a unique roar. Tactical lessons in fighting and haunting came still later, after the forest had taught its living things that staying alive mattered above all else. Grisha loved the forest and all the creatures he met, from the lowly field mouse to the much admired, if rarely seen, mountain lion. He loved the streams, the trees, and the mossy forest floor. Nothing, not a torn paw pad or scraped scale, ever dimmed his spirits. Other dragons were quick to take offense or find fault in the world, but not Grisha. Even when his father died in an unpleasant incident involving a prince and a magic spell, Grisha's sadness was mostly for his mother, whose tears singed her face and gave her a terrible cough. The older dragon's death happened well before Grisha had had a chance to form any lasting memories of his father. Many dragons born to famous fighters found themselves without one or both parents and without memories of the one who was missing. Grisha did understand that with his father gone, he would have to teach himself to breathe fire, a task almost always left to fathers. This scared him a bit, as it could be dangerous to learn on your own. The fire dragons breathe is mostly absorbed by their scales, which are designed to help with both flying and fire extinguishing. In the beginning, however, there are always accidents. Grisha singed his lungs, got a very sore throat, and burned the scales all around his nose. Finally, though, he mastered it. And this has been a preview of the language of spells.